We are on the record. Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, August 15th, 2024. It is approximately 9 a.m. My name is Christine Burke. I'm a public utility law judge with the Maryland Public Service Commission. We're here today for day 3 of an evidentiary hearing in case number 9738, which is captioned the application of Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc. for adjustments to its retail rates and charges for electric distribution service and other tariff revisions. Today's hearing is also being live streamed on YouTube. Could I have the appearances of counsel as well as the name of witnesses that are present today to testify?
Good morning, Your Honor. Mark McDougall on behalf of Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative and Ted Duver of Bracewell, also for Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative.
Good morning. Thank you. For the Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nicole Zeichner on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. I'm joined by Peggy Costello, also of the Office of People's Counsel, and we have OPC witness James A. Lako present today to testify.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For technical staff.
Good morning, Your Honor. James Greger for technical staff. I would also like to enter the appearance of Ruthie Herman and Mike Dean. For staff witnesses, we have the live appearance of Alessandro Lee and David Valcarengi and the virtual appearance of David Hoppick.
Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Angelina Lee from the Department of the Navy. I have with me my colleague Brad Garner from Department of the Navy as well. And for Mr. Robert Stevens, our witness, is also present to testify today.
Great, thank you. Good morning. And I believe we left off yesterday with the Department of the Navy's cross-examination of staff witness Alessandro Lee.
That's right, Your Honor.
Okay, so if staff could please recall Mr. Lee.
Yes. Can you please return to the stand?
Mr. Lee, you're still under oath from yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Lee.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions for you today. In your rebuttal testimony, page 8, line 18, you... absolutely. Yep.
And I'm sorry, what page was that?
In rebuttal testimony, page 8, line 18, you included a quote from a book by Lawrence J. Vogt titled Electricity Pricing, Engineering Principles and Methodologies. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're familiar with this book and its contents?
Yes.
Are you also familiar with staff's response to the Navy's data request number 1-2, which includes a full copy of the chapter 11 of this book?
Yes, I am.
And you assisted in preparation of that response, is that right?
Yes, I did.
At this time, I would like to introduce the staff's response to the Navy's data request 1-2 as Exhibit 5. And I have if I may approach, I have a copy of the document for the witness. Mr. Lee, would you agree that, as a whole, Mr. Vogt's book that you cited from supports the classification of costs from FARC accounts 364-368 as both customer and demand related?
I would, based on my reading of the text, I would characterize the book as having a thorough discussion of customer and demand-related methodologies in the same way that the NARUC manual does.
And if I could have you read just a couple of passages from the book.
Yes.
If you would turn to page 495. Document page 495. On the second paragraph, the highlighted portions, starting with a substantial amount.
You'd like, I'll read?
Yes, please.
Okay. A substantial amount of distribution plan investment has cost causation attributes of both demand and customer cost components. For instance, a line transformer is both customer-related and demand-related as it provides both a load and a no-load function. This distinction is derived through a minimum distribution system analysis of poles, conductors, and a variety of line equipment, which is discussed below.
And if I could also have you turn to page 500. Top of the second paragraph, the highlighted portion, if you would read, please.
Yes, I'll go ahead. When a single device has both customer-related and demand-related attributes, its total cost must be allocated. The minimum intercept or zero intercept methodology provides a rational basis for separating the cost of a device between its customer and demand components.
And just one more, please, page 505. The second paragraph, highlighted portion, starting with as with the line transformer.
Yes. As with a line transformer, the connectivity attribute of a distribution conductor is independent of a load or energy usage and therefore has a customer-related component of cost. In addition, a conductor transports electric current and thus has a load-bearing capability, referred to as ampacity, which indicates a demand-related component of cost. As a result, the zero-intercept analysis is applicable to the primary and secondary conductor systems for separating out the associated customer and demand-related components of cost.
Thank you. And based on the passages that you just read, and based on your previous familiarity with this book, would you agree that Mr. Vogt's work as a whole supports the use of minimum system analysis to determine the customer-related component of the classification of these costs?
As I said in my rebuttal testimony, my argument in general, I acknowledge that some, commonly referenced materials used in cost of service analysis do make reference to, such minimum size or minimum intercept methods where they're well supported. It's used in industry. However, my inclusion of this book in my rebuttal testimony, in my analysis, is to bring attention to the fact that even in those cases where it's supported, there are various qualifications that need to be taken into account to justify or to bring credence to the use of these kind of methods. So, for example, back in page 500, where I was just instructed to read, I believe it says, let's see, when a single device has both customer-related and demand-related attributes, its total cost must be allocated. Even the use of that, the word when, it's in those cases where I believe that to mean in those cases where those devices have those two attributes, then it's allocated in this manner.
Mr. Lee, I believe you characterized those your position as caveats in your rebuttal testimony. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Right. And the caveat that you specifically identified, provided in your quote, states that the level of detail needed to successfully conduct a system rebuild analysis may not be present in plant accounting records. Is that a fair characterization of your rebuttal testimony?
Sorry, would you mind repeating the
Yes.
question, especially that last part that you said?
Yes. So in your rebuttal testimony, you have characterized Mr. Vogt's, the sections that you quoted from Mr. Vogt's text as being caveats. And specifically on page 8, page 8 of your testimony, you provide a quote which states that the caveat being the level of detail needed to successfully conduct a system-revealed analysis may not be present in the plant accounting records. That's
Yeah, that's
that
correct.
correct?
I mean, generally, yeah.
okay. Are you familiar with the Department of Navy's Exhibit 1, which is the SMECO's response to staff data request number 44-3 and its attachments?
Yes, I took a look at this.
Okay. Would you agree that that response provides the SMECO's minimum distribution system study used for classifying account 364-368 costs in this case?
Unfortunately, I had problems when looking at this this exhibit, and you know, this information came a bit too late to be thoroughly analyzed in rebuttal. But you know, even at the time that I received it, it brought up numerous other questions that, to me, once again, kind of demonstrated the general pattern of a lack of robust support for SMECO's use of, not only use of the minimum distribution system, but also its specific classification ratio of 66% customer related to 34% demand.
Would you agree that the response that SMECO provided to staff was provided on about July 18th?
Are you talking about the Navy's Exhibit 1, the one
That's
that we're
correct.
referencing right now, that it was provided on July 18th?
That's correct.
I do not have that information in front of me right now. I mean, I printed out the exhibit, but I don't have the date when I received it right now.
I understand.
Yeah, subject to check. I mean,
Okay, all right. And you did not raise any concerns about this study specifically in your rebuttal or your rebuttal testimony, is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
And based on your review, were you able to find any specific computational errors or data gaps?
Computational errors, I do not believe so. More, I had questions or concerns with a lot of the assumptions or the methods that were used to arrive at the percentages. Those were the sorts of issues that I had.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect from staff?
A few questions, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Lee.
Good morning.
In SMECO's initial application, did it include a minimum system distribution methodology for review for staff or from the intervening parties?
No, it did not.
When was the minimum system distribution methodology first introduced in this case?
I believe it was in response to the Department of the Navy's request. I don't have the exact date on me right now.
So staff did not conduct any independent analysis on a minimum system distribution methodology.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow.
So when you conducted your cost of service analysis,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't view that through a lens of a minimum system distribution method, did you?
No, I analyzed each cost of service, you know, separately as they were provided.
So the first time you reviewed any minimum system distribution methodology analysis was once the Department of the Navy brought it up, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Understood. Thank you. That's all I had, Your Honor.
I don't have any other questions. So, thank you. And we've sort of gone out of the order of witnesses based on yesterday. Is the Department of the Navy prepared to present its
Yes, Your
witness?
Honor. Yep. At this time, I'd like to call Mr. Robert Stevens to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under penalties of perjury truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name, spell your first name and last name, and give us your business address.
My name, excuse me. My name is Robert, Robertr. Stevens, Stephens, and my business address is 16690 Swingley Ridge Road, Suite 140, Chesterfield, Missouri, 63017.
Good morning, Mr. Stevens.
Good morning.
If I could have you restate your name and your business address for the record.
Sure. Robert R. Stevens, 16690 Swingley Ridge Road, Suite 140, Chesterfield, Missouri, 63017.
And if could you please state your business's name and your title?
Certainly. My business's name is Brubaker and Associates Incorporated, and my title is Senior Principal.
Do you have in front of you a document titled Direct Testimony and Exhibits of Robert R. Stevens, consisting of 18 pages of testimony, an appendix listing your qualifications, and 2 exhibits numbered RRS-1 and RRS-2, dated July 3rd, 2024?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I ask that Mr. Stevens' direct testimony and exhibits be marked for identification as Navy Exhibit number 5.
You had previously marked staff's data response to the Navy's 1-1 and 1-2 for identification only as Exhibit 5 in your cross-examination of Mr. Lee. The direct would be marked for identification as Exhibit 6.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Stevens, do you also have before you a document titled Rebuttal Testimony of Robert R. Stevens, consisting of 6 pages of testimony, no exhibits, dated July 19, 2024?
Yes, I do.
I ask that Mr. Stevens' rebuttal testimony be marked as Navy Exhibit number 7.
So marked.
Do you also have before you a public version of a document titled Rebuttal Testimony and Exhibit of Robert R. Stevens, consisting of 20 pages of testimony, dated July 31st, 2024?
Actually, I have the confidential version in front of me, but otherwise your description is correct.
And the public version really is only a redacted version, excluding the exhibit of that testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, I would like to ask that the public version of Mr. Roberts' rebuttal testimony be marked as Exhibit number 8, and the confidential version be marked as 8C.
So marked.
Mr. Stevens, did you prepare this testimony or supervise the direction of the testimonies?
Would you repeat that, please?
Are you the same Robert Stevens who prepared his testimonies?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to these testimonies at this time?
I have 2 minor wording corrections to my rebuttal testimony that I'd like to make just to make it read better. First is at page 7. At line 19, after the word statements, I would insert the word by, B-Y.
Page 7, line? Is that
Line 19.
19.
So that it reads, I see no similar statements by Ms. Minhorn in support of the non-MDS approach in the current case. And then my other minor correction is at page 13, line 19. The word not near the end of the line should be no, so that the sentence reads, while I agree that minimum size methods can be controversial and no method is perfect, ignoring the minimum system and classifying all of the costs as demand related is not a logical solution.
Mr. Stevens, do any of these changes affect the substance of your testimony?
No, they do not.
If these same questions were asked of you today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, is the information contained in this document true and correct and represents your best judgment?
Yes.
And at this time, do you adopt these testimonies as part of your sworn testimony in this matter?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I would like to ask that Navy's Exhibits 6, 7, 8, and 8C be moved into the record as evidence.
Is there any objection? Okay.
Okay, Mr.
The direct testimony will be marked and entered into the record as the Department of Navy's Exhibit 6 of Mr. Stevens. Rebuttal testimony will be marked and entered as the Department of Navy's Exhibit 7. Mr. Stevens' surrebuttal public version will be marked and entered into the record as the Department of the Navy's Exhibit 8. And the confidential version of that same testimony will be marked and entered into the record as the Department of the Navy's Exhibit 8C.
Your Honor, the witness is ready for cross-examination.
No questions? Office of People's Counsel?
No questions, Your Honor.
For staff.
I just have a few questions, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Stevens.
Good morning.
I'm James Greger with Commission staff. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Mr. Greger.
So I just had a question. If the Commission were to use the minimum system distribution methodology to help guide rates in this present case, would it need to rely on the information provided by the company in response to Staff DRs 44-3 and Staff DR 44-4, which in this case has been marked as Department of Navy Exhibits 1 and 2 in order to effectively guide rates in that manner?
To begin, I wouldn't presume to tell the Commission what they have to rely on in a case. Those are the only minimum distribution system studies present in the case. I believe the Commission could make whatever classification it wanted to. It could rely on other splits in the classification between customer demand and energy. I don't believe that a 0 and 100% split is reasonable, and I wouldn't recommend the Commission do that. But if the Commission wanted to deviate from the 66% customer and 34% demand, they of course could do so. They could use a judgmental weighting such as 50-50% or 48%, 52%, as was used in case number 9456, which seems to be the standard against which later MDS studies are measured. So if the Commission has more confidence in the 48%, 52%, they certainly could use that to guide rate setting.
Understood. Thank you. That was the only question I had, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you have any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. And Office of People's Counsel, are you prepared with your witness? Sorry.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm on the penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
My name is James A. Lako, and my business address is 16690 Swingley Ridge Road, Suite 140, Chesterfield, Missouri, 63107.
Can you spell your first and last name, please?
JAMES LEYKO. morning.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is James A. Lako.
And would you please state the name of your business and its address and location?
My business is Brubaker and Associates Incorporated, and the address is 16690 Swingley Ridge Road, Suite 140, Chesterfield, Missouri 63017.
And would you please state the position that you hold in that business?
Consultant.
And you said consultant. What area do you provide consultation services in?
So I would say, revenue requirement.
Okay. Now, Mr. Lako, do you have before you a public version of a document entitled Direct Testimony and Exhibits of James A. Lako on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel, dated July 3rd, 2024, and filed in this case, which includes 33 numbered pages of narrative testimony, your curriculum vitae, qualifications, and corporate profile as Appendix JALA, and Exhibits JAL1 through JAL9?
I do.
Okay. And, Your Honor, I would ask to have the public version, well, the only version of Mr. Lako's pre-filed direct testimony marked for identification purposes as OPC Exhibit 4.
So marked.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Lako, do you also have in front of you a document entitled Sir Rebuttal Testimony of James A. Lako on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel, dated July 31st, 2024, and filed in this case, which includes 20 numbered pages of narrative testimony?
I do.
And, Your Honor, I would ask that Mr. Lako's Sir Rebuttal Testimony be marked for identification purposes as OPC Exhibit 5.
So marked.
Now, Mr. Lako, were all of the documents before you that encompass your pre-filed testimony in this matter prepared by you or under your supervision and direction?
They were.
And do you have any corrections or deletions to make to your testimony at this time?
I have two corrections, or I guess 2 edits to my direct testimony.
Okay, and could you please describe those for the court?
Okay, first on page 14, line 15, I referenced staff data request number 5-28. Now my exhibit JAL-2 was supposed to include a copy of every data response I referenced. This one was excluded mistakenly.
Okay.
And what line are,
Sorry, I'm on page 14, line 15, where I referenced staff data request number 5-28.
okay.
And, Your Honor, permission to approach the witness, please. Now, Mr. Lako, is this in fact a copy of SMECO's response to staff data request 5.28?
Yes, and again, this should have been included in my exhibit, but mistakenly wasn't.
Permission to approach, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I would ask that SMECO's response to staff's data request 5-28 be marked for identification purposes as OPC Exhibit 6 in this matter.
So marked.
And Your Honor, I would ask that OPC Exhibit 6 be moved into evidence as a supplement to Mr. Lako's direct testimony.
Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Lako, you mentioned 2 corrections that you wish to make. Can you please describe the second correction?
Yes, on page 25, line 4, the 5.3 should actually be 2.2. That's a
Okay.
typo.
And is this also in your direct testimony?
Yes, I apologize.
Okay,
Yes, page
and
25 of my direct testimony, line 4.
Line 4, okay. And you stated that the 5.3 should be 2.2?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. And does that change impact?
One moment. I just want to get there. Okay. And it was,
Line 4 on page
Got
25.
it. and the 5.3 should be,
2.2.
thank you.
Now, Mr. Lako, does that change impact any of the calculations in your testimony?
No.
Okay. And Mr. Lako, do your corrections change any of the opinions or conclusions that you expressed in either your direct or rebuttal testimony?
They do not.
If you were asked the same questions today under oath, would your answers be the same?
With the exception of the change in typos, yes.
Okay. And for these reasons, do you adopt these direct and rebuttal testimonies as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Your Honor, I would move to admit OPC Exhibits 4 and 5 into evidence in this matter.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. The direct testimony of James Lako will be marked and entered as OPC Exhibit 4, and the rebuttal testimony of James Lako will be marked and entered as OPC Exhibit 5.
Now, Mr. Lako, did you sponsor a data request, a bench data request on behalf of OPC? A bench
did.
data request response. I apologize. Permission to approach, Your Honor? Now, Mr. Lako, in front of you, are you in fact holding OPC's response to bench data request number 1?
Yes,
And did you sponsor that response on behalf of OPC?
I did.
Okay. Your Honor, I would ask that OPC's response to bench data request 1 be marked for identification purposes as OPC Exhibit 7.
So marked.
And Your Honor, I would ask that OPC Exhibit 7 be moved into evidence in this
Is there
matter.
any objection?
No objection.
No objection.
Response to bench data request 1-1 will be marked and entered as OPC's Exhibit 7.
And Your Honor, the witness is now available for cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Lako.
Good morning.
Could we start off with the exhibit that you just had entered as a supplement to your testimony, and it's the rate case expenses and amortization?
Yes.
Are you aware and have you seen updated information that has been provided by the company regarding the actual costs that it has incurred to date through the end of July of 2024?
I'm aware of it, but I would note that my I relied on the final line of this data response. My adjustment was to the amortization period, not to the expense. So I don't know if the updated response has that same line in it. Just referencing the fact that SMECO selected a 2-year amortization period for the reasons stated.
Right. Well, what I'm asking about is the total, like the total estimated expense that SMECO had put at the beginning of its case when it filed its case. It was based on experience and it was estimated.
Yes.
And since that time, are you aware that SMECO has provided data request responses and updated the actual incurred rate case expenses to date?
I am. I don't know what the number is, though.
And would the updated figures have any impact? Have you taken a look at them, the updates?
I mean, I think it was included as part of Kennedy's rebuttal testimony because with the updated revenue requirement.
Correct. And then also there was an update to data request responses where actual invoices were provided through the end of July.
The updated data response with the actual invoices, but it would not change my recommendation.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Thank you. Mr. Lako, would you agree, you address inflation in your testimony, and please correct me if I in any way get this wrong or mischaracterize your testimony. I don't intend to. But you do agree that at least for the period of 2024 that you accept that an inflation adjustment would be appropriate. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And and you acknowledge and agree that we are currently in an inflationary environment. Is that correct?
I agree, but with the caveat that we're sort of moving out of it based on the data I referenced in my direct testimony where I looked at economists' forecasts for future inflation, and it's coming down from the highs that it was at.
And conceptually, you agree that and I'm going to put this in my layman's terms, but when you have periods of inflation, inflation causes upward pressure on cost. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you don't dispute that SMECO has experienced upward pressure on its costs due to the inflationary environment that is in place. Is that correct?
No, I would not dispute that.
Yeah. And you would agree that inflation was high in 2022,
Yes.
and you would agree that inflation was high in 2023?
Yes.
Okay. And so SMECO moving into 2023, you would agree experienced upward pressure on the costs of providing service to its customers.
I mean, obviously, I can't speak to SMECO's experience, but I would say it's understandable that the high inflation over the past couple of years would have had an upward pressure on SMECO's costs.
And when you reviewed all of the data requests and all of the information that SMECO provided regarding its costs, its revenues, et cetera, you didn't, and if there was anything unusual that you would have found in that testimony, you would have raised it in that information, you would have raised it in your testimony. Is that correct?
I will say yes, but I will caveat that with I did not review SMECO's 2023 results as closely as I reviewed SMECO's proposals in this rate case.
You would agree, though, that SMECO has provided a significant amount of information regarding its 2022 and 2023 costs and revenues?
I don't know. It's sort of what you classify as significant, but yes, SMECO did provide a lot of information.
I'd like to, how many rate cases have you testified in where the utility was a cooperative utility?
This is the first one.
And you've seen a lot of the testimony and discussion among many of the witnesses, and you've probably seen it in terms of like observing this hearing, that there are some significant differences between IOUs and cooperative utilities?
Yes.
And you would agree that one of the principal differences is that a cooperative utility does not have shareholders. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a cooperative utility is effectively owned by its customer members. Is
Yes.
that correct? And so it's a not-for-profit?
Yes.
Okay. And so you would agree that that an IOU, on the other hand, it has the similar obligation to serve its customers and to meet its statutory obligation.
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you repeat the question?
Said you would agree that an IOU has the same obligation to serve its customers, and I reference the fact that it's a statutory obligation. If you're not certain whether there is a statute that requires utilities in the state of Maryland to provide service within their service territories, then you can let me know.
The basis of your objection, just
Your Honor, I would argue this is beyond the scope of cross-examination. He was asked generally whether he's familiar with cooperatives, but now we're getting into the details of cooperatives, and I would argue it's beyond the scope.
okay. So overruled. I think if he can answer the question.
I would say every utility has an obligation to serve its customers.
Okay. Do you agree that an investor-owned utility also has a duty or obligation to its shareholders to maximize earnings?
Yes.
And so I wanted to touch upon your discussion of incentive compensation programs at SMECO. Is it a fair characterization of your testimony that your understanding of precedent in Maryland is that to the extent that there are any incentives that are paid out by the company that are tied to financial goals, that the commission has disallowed those?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And do you know how the commission defines what a financial goal is?
I do not know how the commission defines that.
And have you cite to a Potomac Edison case in your direct testimony, and I can refer you to page 18 of your direct testimony.
Yes.
The question begins on line 13, and the discussion carries over to page 19. And there you have a discussion on 19 of Washington Gas Light. Do you see that?
Yes.
Have you reviewed Potomac Edison's incentive compensation plan prior to putting together this testimony?
I have not. I don't believe so.
And so you aren't familiar with what Potomac Edison's metrics are that trigger a payment of incentive compensation?
I would say I'm familiar with what investor utilities usually use, which is earnings per share or total shareholder return. And I assume Potomac Edison is using something similar. And I would also note that I was involved in the, I did review Washington Gas and Light's incentive compensation plans, which is the other commission order I cite.
Right. And in that case, is that one where what you just described, earnings per share and those types of financial metrics, are those financial targets included in Washington Gas's incentive compensation plan?
I would have to double check because that case was last year, but I believe so.
You would agree that SMECO does not have a financial metric in its incentive compensation plans?
I would. SMECO does not call it a financial metric, but what is the title it's given? Apologies, let me look it up. I would say it operates similarly to a financial metric. The efficiency metric.
And so you're saying that to the extent that SMECO employs efficiencies that would help to stabilize or lower rates for customers, that is a financial metric? That's your testimony?
I believe it operates similar to the financial metrics in context of whether or not these costs should be included or whether or not these costs should be recovered from customers as incentive compensation, because to the extent that the operating efficiency metric produces savings to the company can pay the incentive compensation out of those savings.
Right. You would agree that in the IOU context, when a commission or Maryland Commission disallows incentive compensation that is tied to financial metrics, it's because the benefits that flow from those metrics flow to shareholders. Isn't that true?
I believe that is one of the reasons. I don't know if that's the exclusive reason, because again, I mentioned that to the extent these metrics produce revenues to the company or savings to the company, they can pay the incentive compensation out of those savings.
And to the extent that SMECO employs measures that create operating efficiencies, I believe, as you call them in your testimony.
Well, I believe that's what SMECO calls them, but yes.
Okay. So to the extent that operating efficiencies are met, you would agree that those operating efficiencies, the benefits flow directly to customer members of SMECOs?
They flow to the company, and then it would depend on what the time period in terms of the capital credits and everything is, but I'd say at a high level, yes.
I want to touch briefly on your discussion of offsets, where you talk about the fact that SMECO, and I think you use this in your inflation adjustment, that SMECO did not account for any additional revenues that it may experience that could act as an offset against upward cost pressure. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And these additional revenues are through the form of new customer hookups?
And use per customer.
So you do realize that, and there's been some discussion in this case about energy efficiency and the fact that there's promoting energy efficiency. In fact, I don't know, are you familiar with the testimony on the facilities charge that was put in by OPC witness Nelson?
I am not.
But you would agree that with new customer hookups, for example, that there are costs associated with hooking up those customers as well?
Yes.
And those costs can vary depending on whether or not there is a need to upgrade facilities that are currently in place that are incapable of serving new customers?
I mean, SMECO would know more about that than I would, but generally speaking, yes, the cost would increase when you add customers to the system, but revenues also increase.
Okay. Did you listen to the hearing where there was a discussion of a move in the state of Maryland to electrification?
No, I only listened to the first day of the hearing. I only listened to the revenue requirement sections on the first day of the hearing.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, when you talk about the additional revenues based on whether it's use or new customer hookups, do you discuss the costs associated, the fact that SMECO would incur costs associated with those?
I did not discuss it in my direct testimony. I did address it in my surrebuttal testimony.
And you acknowledge, though, that whatever additional revenues that may or may not appear, but let's assume they do, that there would have to be a reflection of whatever the costs are of hooking those up, that there would have to be an offset there.
You do not necessarily have to address the offset, because I do think that there are cost increases elsewhere in cost of service that have been addressed in the revenue requirement. For example, some of these costs, for example, in my direct testimony, I allowed SMECO to have some, additional, sorry, let me rephrase that. In my direct testimony, I reviewed SMECO's proposed increases in cost in 2024, and I do believe some of that can be used, or some of that can be addressed to help offset the increase in cost from new customers.
Are you generally familiar with compensation programs at, you say you've testified for investor-owned utilities,
Yes.
so you're generally familiar with compensation programs?
Yes.
Which would include a base, either salary or wage, and then there are, in addition to that, certain benefits and incentives
Yes.
that tend to be built. And do you think it's fair to look at compensation programs holistically in terms of looking at the total amount that is paid out by the company for its employees?
I believe that is one aspect of it. You can look at, I would say there's a distinction between how the company designs its compensation programs and how those programs are treated for rate-making purposes. Now, the total compensation can be reasonable and comparable to other companies in the market, other utilities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of those costs are reasonable to recover in rates.
Would you agree with the statement that when a utility, and you can talk about the utilities that you have worked with in the past, but generally speaking, that when a utility designs a compensation program, that it is sensitive to the fact that they are trying to retain or actually recruit talent to come to work for the utility?
Yeah, I say that's a fair statement.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about the labor adjustment, payroll adjustment. And you agree that for the bargaining unit employees, that there is a collective bargaining agreement in place that has a mandate regarding what the increases should be for bargaining unit employees to their wages. Is that correct?
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm as familiar with it as that question implies, but I am familiar. I do know that Witness Kennedy described it as a contractual obligation.
Okay. And in fact, for the wage increase that is in effect right now, that do have agreed that that should be included in rates, correct? The wage increase for 2024.
Yes.
And in your opinion, your expert opinion, you believe that that contractually obligated wage increase is known and measurable?
Yes, I would say that's a known and measurable change.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Technical staff.
No cross from staff, Your Honor.
No questions, Your Honor.
I don't have any other questions either. Do you have redirect?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Latham. Mr. Hoppe, can you hear us? See. Okay, let me fix that. All right, great. And Mr. Court Reporter, yes. So just a moment, let me move the microphone. Can you say something just so we know the court reporter can hear you?
Audio test. Can you hear me?
That's good.
Good? Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And staff?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, staff calls David Hoppick to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm on the penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
First name is David, D-A-V-I-D. Last name is Hoppock, H-O-P-P-O-C-K. My business address is 6 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland, 21202.
Thank you. Mr. Hoppick, good morning. Please state your full name and employer for the record.
My full name is David Hoppock, and my employer is the technical staff of the Maryland Public Service Commission.
And what position do you hold with the commission?
I'm a senior research analyst.
Thank you. Now, do you have before you a document titled Direct Testimony and Exhibits of David Hoppick, filed on July 3rd, 2024, comprised of 62 pages of narrative testimony and 3 exhibits?
I do.
Thank you. And do you have before you a document titled The Rebuttal Testimony and Exhibits of David Hoppick, filed on July 19th, 2024, consisting of 7 pages of narrative testimony and 1 exhibit?
I do.
Thank you. And do you have before you a document titled The Surrebuttal Testimony and Exhibits of David Hoppick, filed on July 31st, 2024, consisting of 31 pages of narrative testimony and 2 exhibits?
I do.
Were these documents prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections to make to any of these documents?
Yeah, I have one minor correction to my direct, and then one minor correction to my surrebuttal. Starting with my direct testimony, Exhibit DH3, there's a cover page. It's the 84th page in the PDF. So it says Exhibit DH3, and below that reference that should say reference SMECO responses to staff data requests. And then on my rebuttal testimony, table 3, which I need to find the page of. Sorry, apologies. Table 3 is on page 8. The column on the far right of the table reads April 2024 BSA filing forecast 2024. That should say August 2024 BSA filing forecast 2024. And that includes corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppick. And do these corrections lead to any changes to the conclusions you make in your testimony?
They do not.
And inclusive of these corrections, if you were asked the same questions contained in these pre-filed testimonies here today, would your answers remain the same?
They would.
And do you accept these pre-filed testimonies as your testimony here today?
I do.
Thank you. Your Honor, I believe we're up to Staff Exhibit 8. If I could get the direct testimony of David Hoppick marked for identification as Staff Exhibit 8. And the rebuttal testimony of David Hoppick, if I could get that marked as Staff Exhibit 9. And then the surrebuttal testimony of Staff Witness David Hoppick, if I could get that marked as Staff Exhibit 10. And I would ask that those be moved into the evidentiary record, Your Honor.
No objection.
No objection.
Direct, Mr. Hoppick will be marked and entered as Exhibit 8. The rebuttal testimony of Mr. Hoppick will be marked and entered as Staff's Exhibit 9. And the surrebuttal testimony of Mr. Hoppick will be marked and entered as Staff's Exhibit 10.
Thank you, Your Honor. This witness is available for cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Hoppick.
Good morning.
A much earlier morning for you.
Yes. So I don't know if it matters, but you're not in my camera view. I can hear you.
That's
perfectly
probably a
fine.
good thing.
I defer to the judge. That's an issue.
Is that
Okay.
Is that better?
Yes. Now, I believe I can see all of the SMECO counsel.
All right, great.
If
Well,
that matters.
I'm not
as
going
long as they
to.
hear me.
Great. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I have some very, very limited questions. You have recommended well, let me start off with this. You focused in on language that is included in the lighting tariffs that SMECO currently has in place that discusses an option for retail choice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And your recommendation is that the commission should convene a separate proceeding in order to explore whether or not retail choice should continue to be an option for lighting customers. Is that correct?
I think my wording is require SMECO. If you can give me a moment to get to it in my direct testimony. I want to make sure I get the wording right. Apologies. Direct testimony is not super short. Okay, I'm there. And I'm on page 59 of my direct testimony. And my recommendation, and I'll just read it, is that the commission requires SMECO to make a separate filing, not in this proceeding, so not in case number 9738, explaining the status of retail retail choice for its Schedule Schedule AL and SL customers. As part of this filing, SMECO would be free to propose changes to retail choice for these classes. So my recommendation is not in this proceeding, but I'm not recommending that the commission open a case or something like that. My guess is if this were done, it would be an administrative filing, something heard at an administrative meeting.
And the outcome of this administrative filing and addressing it at the administrative meeting would be potentially revisions to the street lighting tariffs?
Yes, I mean, that would be up to the commission.
And you have reviewed Ms. Rory's testimony regarding this particular issue, retail choice for lighting customers, correct?
I have.
And I believe, and please, once again, if I misstate or mischaracterize, correct me, but you have said that you've characterized Ms. Rory's testimony as saying that the cooperative has acknowledged that it has never provided retail choice to any customers in its service territory that are lighting customers, lighting customers in its service territory. Is that correct?
So yeah, I believe I'm in the correct location on my rebuttal testimony. Can you repeat the question
Well,
again? I apologize.
actually, that's good that you've referenced. So looking at your rebuttal testimony on page 18, you state, Witness Rory states that SMECO has never offered retail choice to its lighting customers and is not aware of any retail suppliers offering retail supply options to lighting customers in SMECO's service territory. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. You would agree that that is the current status of retail choice with respect to lighting customers in SMECO's service territory. Is that correct?
Yes, that is my understanding, yes.
Okay. I have nothing further.
No questions, Your Honor.
No questions, Your Honor.
I have no redirect, Your Honor.
Okay.
With respect to the lighting schedule, there was testimony from witness Menhorn in her rebuttal testimony that the schedules AL and SL for the lighting class are the same from a cost of service perspective. Do you agree with that?
So there was a data request in which the company stated that they currently use the same equipment for schedules AL and SL, but as part of my rebuttal, let me get to it. I believe it's at the top of my rebuttal. We asked, or I specifically asked, as part of my rebuttal testimony, to provide a cost of service study for the historical test year in the instant case, this case, with results for Schedule SL and AL, and the results are, I would say, very, very different. Schedule SL has a relative rate of return of more than 3, and Schedule AL is operating at a loss. So I would not characterize the classes as having similar, I would characterize them as having very different cost of service results.
What, if any, other information from the company would have been needed for you to support creation of the LS schedule?
So I talked about this a bit in my rebuttal, or at length in my rebuttal. So if you look at Witness Menhorn's rate worksheets, she has in her rate worksheets the historical test year fixtures for schedules AL and SL. And then she has the rates, the revenues for the historical test year. There's a revenue adjustment. And then proposed rates. And one of those historical fixtures, as I discussed in my direct, both AL and SL list an LED lighting option. So in the rate design worksheets, she is applying the rate change to all AL and SL rates to get to what is allocated to Schedule LS for her revenue allocation. If you look in the tariff for Schedule LS, which was provided by SMECO witness Rory, there are all of what I'll call the legacy Schedule AL and SL lights, meaning all of the non-LED lights. The only LED lights included in Schedule LS are these four new, there's four types of lighting for overhead and four types of lighting for underground with calculated rates. And the rate calculations were, the basis for the rate calculations were provided in the in response to a data request. So in order to know the amount of revenue per the submitted tariff for Schedule LS, we need to know in the historical test year, or in my opinion, I need to know in the historical test year, the number of LED fixtures for those different light types, because then I'd know the proposed amount of revenue to get for those classes. But because the way rates are calculated, we have the LED lights still in AL and still in SL in terms of how rates are calculated and how revenue is calculated. So that's one issue. The other issue is that, obviously I talk about Schedule SL and AL having pretty significantly different rates of return. In Witness Menhorn's proposal for the rates for those schedules, the legacy non-LED rates, the rates increased by approximately the same amount. In my rebuttal testimony, I did not allocate any incremental revenue increase to Schedule SL. I did allocate to AL because it was under earning. So, that I would not feel comfortable with a uniform change in historical non-LED rates. And then the final issue I raised in my direct is the increase in LED rates from the existing AL and SL LED rates to the proposed Schedule LS LED rates are pretty large. In some cases, over 100%. So there's also gradualism issues related to the proposed rates themselves. And there's also, there's assumptions about the DSC, and I'm obviously not the DSC witness, but there's multiple party positions on things like the DSC. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. With respect to the using weather normalized billing determinants versus the historical test year data, could you address SMECO's concerns that using weather normalized billing determinants will continue the problem of not recovering the outstanding deferred revenue?
So certainly. So first, it's important to note, and I discussed this in my testimony, I'm on page 12 of my rebuttal testimony. So Schedule R did not have any deferred rider BSA balance in its most recent, so the most recent filing was July 24th. I don't believe the company has made a subsequent filing. So there was no ongoing balance for Schedule R. So Schedule R just does not have that issue. And if you were to not use historical test year weather normalized billing determinants, you were to use the historical test year actual, specifically with the goal of having future rate effective actual, which we don't know yet, actual billing determinants, making it more likely that they're higher than the historical test year billing determinants rates are based on, you would be affecting Schedule R as well, which does not have this issue. And I would argue that that would be unfair to Schedule R. Additionally, a weather normalized set of billing determinants should approximate weather, like an average weather year on net. So I think if you use weather normalized billing determinants in terms of the actuals you see, actual billing determinants you see in the rate effective period over a year or longer period, there tends to be a lot of variation month to month because you have a hot month, then a cooler month relative to historical. But you should likely be in a situation where it's about an even chance that actuals over a year or longer are higher than the forecast, and then about even chance that they're lower than the forecast. Whereas if you use billing determinants from a mild weather year, which I demonstrate that the historical test year in this case was, I think you're changing that such that rates are set based on billing determinants that make it more likely that actuals are higher than the historical test year rates used to set them.
Thank you. Is there any redirect based on my questions?
No, Your Honor, no redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Hopping.
Thank you.
Your Honor, if we could have a few minutes to switch out. Staff's last witness will be David Valcarengi.
Yes, and we can take a 15-minute break.
Thank you, Your Honor.
This is actually not very good.
Very good, me too. So you ready for your 6 hours of cross-examination?
We gotta fill the space till 5.
That's right.
So I'm the only one standing between.
Between us and lunch.
Yes.
Yeah. Mark's already got his he's ready for the
I know.
beach.
I know.
Tie.
The tie
Hey,
is
you-
ready.
Yeah,
perfect.
you're-
Take on the seashells all over it.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
good to
ready.
go.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Ted, are you based on the?
Yes. Yeah, I live up there, so but I
Do you live in the city?
not anymore.
Okay.
I moved just. Are you familiar? So I live in Westchester.
Yep.
I live in Dobbs in the river towns. I live in Dobbs Ferry,
Okay.
which is, I can on a Saturday morning with no traffic, I can get to my office if I drive in like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
It's so close. So I'm
Workers' comp case.
not too a stone's throw from Yonkers.
Just has to have happened while you're at
Yeah,
work.
no.
You can't say, well, you should have looked.
We
through
moved
this
out
bubble.
of the city when we started to have family, just to have something that wasn't,
A little more space.
yeah, a little bit more space and all. The funniest part, I always tell the story when we did it, is because my daughter was, like, she was, I believe, around 3 when we were looking to leave, and so we got in the car, we were driving up the park, like the Sawmill Parkway to get, and she wakes up from a nap, and she's like looking around, and she knew we were going to look at for places to live. She's like, "We're moving to the jungle," because she saw trees, and she had no idea because she was so used to concrete and buildings and all of that. So this notion that there are trees overhanging over
That's
things,
funny.
and so she was like, "We're moving to the jungle." It was she was a huge like Lion King fan, so that was really she was like she was all set. Exactly. I was on the Upper West Side. So, my wife was on the Upper East Side.
you. And we're ready to proceed with staff's last witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Staff wishes to formally call Mr. David Valcarengi to the stand and ask that he be sworn in, please.
Your Honor, may I'm sorry to do this out of order, but may address one issue. On my cross-examination of Mr. Valcarengi, I'm going to be referring to documents that previously had been admitted into the record as SMECO exhibits. In order to avoid killing too many trees, didn't make 6 copies of everything. I do have a courtesy copy for the witness that I can hand up, but I don't know if we wanted to address that, like if everybody has their sets of all of the exhibits here today. I just wanted to, or if they need to get them, I didn't want to sort of drop that on everybody before we got going.
Does everyone have the exhibits that were previously entered?
I'm going to share with OPC, so thank you.
This is the Department of
I
the
don't
Navy.
have a physical copy, but please proceed.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Court Reporter, could you please swear the witness in?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm on the penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first name and last name, and give us your business address.
David Valcarengi, D-A-V-I-D, Valcarengi, V-A-L-C-A-R-E-N-G-H-I. Business address, 6 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland, 21202.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Valcarengi. May I ask you to talk closely to the microphone and just restate your full name and your position for the record, sir?
My name is David L. Valcarengi. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the second part of your sentence.
Oh, and your position. What is your position with the PSC,
Assistant
sir?
Director of Accounting, Maryland Public Service Commission.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Valcarengi, do you have in front of you the direct testimony of David Valcarengi, which was filed on July 3rd, 2024, with the mail log number 310654, consisting of a cover page, a table of contents, and 36 pages of narrative testimony, followed by Exhibit DLV1, Exhibit DLV2, and Exhibit DLV3.
I do.
Mr. Valcarengi, did you also cause to have filed on July 3rd, 2024, with your direct testimony, one confidential exhibit?
I did.
Mr. Valcarengi, other than the errata, which we'll get to in a minute, do you have any other corrections, additions, or deletions to your direct testimony?
No.
Your Honor, staff requests that the direct testimony with exhibits, as I just mentioned, plus the confidential exhibit of Mr. Valcarengi be marked as Staff 11 and 11C.
So marked.
Mr. Valcarengi, if I were to ask you each of the questions now under oath, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Valcarengi, was this testimony prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes.
Mr. Valcarengi, do you accept and adopt this testimony as your own?
I do.
Your Honor, at this time, staff requests that Staff 11 and 11C be moved into evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. The direct and the confidential version of the direct testimony of David Valcarengi will be marked and entered into the record as Staff's Exhibit 11 and 11C.
Mr. Valcarengi, do you have in front of you the errata to the direct testimony of David Valcarengi, which was filed on August 9th, 2024, and assigned the mail log number 311574?
I do.
Sir, was this errata prepared by you or under your supervision?
It was.
At this time, do you have any deletions, corrections, or additions, sir?
No.
Mr. Valcarengi, did this errata change any conclusions in any of your testimony?
It didn't change the conclusion. It changed the ultimate revenue requirement that came out of my direct testimony.
Thank you. Your Honor, at the... I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No. Your Honor, staff requests that the errata to the direct testimony of David Valcarengi be marked as Staff 12.
So marked.
Mr. Valcarengi, do you accept and adopt the errata to your direct testimony as your own, sir?
I do.
At this time, Your Honor, staff requests that staff 12 be moved into evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. The errata to the direct testimony of David Valcarengi will be marked and entered into the record as staff's Exhibit 12.
Mr. Valcarengi, do you have with you in front of you the surrebuttal testimony of David Valcarengi that was filed on July 31, 2024, and assigned the mail log number 311316?
I do.
And this consisted of a cover page, a table of contents, 28 pages of narrative testimony, and exhibits DLV-2S and DLV-3S. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Mr. Valcarengi, do you have at this time any additions, deletions, or corrections to the surrebuttal testimony?
I do not.
Mr. Valcarengi, was this prepared by you or under your direction?
It was.
At this time, Your Honor, staff requests that the surrebuttal testimony as David Valcarengi be marked as staff 13.
So marked.
Mr. Valcarengi, if I were to ask you each of these questions under oath today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
And at this time, do you accept and adopt the surrebuttal testimony as your own?
I do.
At this time, Your Honor, staff requests that staff 13 be moved into evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. The surrebuttal testimony of David Valcarengi will be marked and entered into the record as staff's Exhibit 13.
Your Honor, at this time, I request to approach the bench and the witness and my co-counsel with copies of staff's response to bench data request 1.
Okay.
Mr. Valcarengi, did I just hand you a copy of staff's response to the bench data request number 1 in this case?
Yes.
Mr. Valcarengi, can you verify that you authored the answers and the attachment?
I did.
At this time, Your Honor, we'd like to request that this be marked as staff 14.
So marked.
And Mr. Valcarengi, can you verify that you did write these answers and you accept them as your own today?
I do. I did, and I do.
Your Honor, staff requests that staff 14 be moved into evidence.
The response to bench data request 1-1 will be marked and entered. I'm sorry, is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. That response to bench data request 1-1 will be marked and entered as staff's Exhibit 14.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, staff offers the witness for cross-examination.
Company?
Good morning, Mr. Valcarengi. How are you today? So, we'd just like to start off and ask you, I guess, some questions that are similar to what I explored with Mr. Lako earlier. So, how many rate cases have you been involved in during your time here with staff that involved cooperative utilities?
I've testified in a number of SMECO proceedings. There's an attachment to my direct that lists all of the cases that I've been involved in. I think I would, off the top of my head, I would add it up to about 3 or 4.
Okay. And they're all rate cases and not some other type of proceeding that involves SMECO, is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
And you've been with, so you testified approximately 3 or 4, and would the SMECO cases that you offered testimony in and were involved in, would they be listed on your CV, your attachment DLV-1?
All cases that I have presented testimony
are on that
list.
Okay. And they date back to, I believe it was 1986 or something like that?
85, 86.
85,
somewhere
86.
in that
So you've been with the commission for approximately 39 years?
Well, there was a gap of approximately 5 years. So it's approximately 35 or 36 years that I've been affiliated with the commission.
Well, let's talk about the gap. You didn't reference anything in your narrative testimony regarding any time that you spent away from the commission. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor. I'm not sure why it's relevant.
I agree. Sustained.
I didn't point it out in.
Sustained.
Okay. Your Honor, may I be just heard on the objection? Because I have other questions, and I'm not certain whether we are intending to bring in exhibits, and I want to lay the foundation for being able to bring in certain exhibits. And Mr. Valcarengi's time away from the commission is directly relevant to being able to establish that foundation.
I'd like to be heard, if I may. I don't understand why what other job he might have had could be relevant to this case. This is a race case about SMECO's distribution rates. Questions about this case are relevant. Questions about what he may have done 5 or 10 years ago, I don't know how they could be relevant.
Your Honor, as an expert witness that is putting himself up on revenue requirement issues and rates and regulatory issues, just like any other expert in this case, they put their CVs to show where they have testified, where that they have provided testimony, and their positions can be tested based on their prior testimony. To the extent, and this is why I had asked about it's foundational and I have additional questions, to the extent that Mr. Valcarengi has offered expert testimony on revenue requirements issues that are similar to the issues that are being raised in his testimony here at SMECO, I think that is fair to be able to address and to discuss with him.
I'm going to allow it for limited, subject to going away, how far away we're going away from what's relevant in
I can
this
get
case.
right to the point.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Valcarengi, you previously used that gap that you had just referenced was a gap that when you spent time working as manager of rates and regulation for artesian water. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you, in fact, did you provide, well, let me ask you the question. Did you provide testimony as an expert for artesian water while you were with the company?
I'm going to object again, Your Honor, and I'm sorry to delay things, but whatever he's clearly an expert. He's been authenticated. His exhibit DLV1 speaks for itself. Whatever he may or may have interpreted or done for artesian water is just not relevant here for this distribution rate case.
I agree that I don't see the relevance to what that, and I'm going to give you one or two more questions to show what the relevance is to this case, but I agree with staff.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'd like to see it first. What's being?
I'm about to hand it
Okay,
up.
thank you so much. And I apologize. Again, I'm going to state my objection to this being asked about or even entered in the record. I don't see the relevance.
I don't believe it's being offered as an exhibit right now. Is that correct?
Not at this moment. I will be offering it up after I establish a foundation, and I can make an offer of proof for Your Honor as far as what the relevance is of these documents specifically, and what I would intend to do with the documents. Okay, so Mr. Valcarengi has testified to a number of issues in this particular proceeding, and he's testified to issues concerning incentive compensation, payroll and labor adjustments. He's talked about what the goals of incentive compensation are. he has also testified about those very same issues in this proceeding. And he has taken a very different position in this proceeding. And my intention is to explore the differences between what he's testified to here and the positions that he's taking here as two different pieces of testimony on similar issues. And he is taking, I think, opposite positions.
It is cross-examination, so I'm going to allow him to question him based on what his offer of proof. You'll have an opportunity to redirect and follow up with questions based on what.
Yeah, I understand and respect that, Your Honor. I just want to note for the record that staff objects to this line of questioning and sees no relevance here. Thank you.
Your Honor, I would like to, in the first instance, have marked for identification as SMECO Exhibit 21 the direct testimony of David L. Valcarengi on behalf of Artesian Water Company, Incorporated, dated April 11th, 2014.
So marked.
And I would like to have marked for identification as SMECO Exhibit 22 the rebuttal testimony of David L. Valcarengi on behalf of Artesian Water Company, Inc. It's dated October 27th, 2014, and both of these pieces of testimony relate to a PSC, Delaware PSC docket number 14-132.
I'm sorry, counsel, I only have rebuttal. I don't have direct. Did you just say direct is 21 and rebuttal is 22?
I have direct. I do not have rebuttal. And direct is 21.
Okay, I didn't get that, but counsel, OPC counsel will share with me.
Oh,
have
you can have
correct.
that one. That's an extra one.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Valcarengi, you've been handed what has been marked as SMECO 21 and SMECO 22 for identification. Do you have these documents in front of you?
21 is the direct and 22 is the rebuttal.
Correct.
I have them.
Okay. And are you the same David L. Valcarengi that filed testimony in this docket 14-132 on behalf of Artesian Water?
Yes, I haven't been through this document, so I can't state for the record that this represents a true and accurate copy of what was submitted before the Delaware Public Service Commission, though.
Okay. Did you testify live at the hearings before the Delaware Public
Again,
Service?
I'm sorry, objection for stated for the other reasons. I don't know what's relevant about whether Mr. Valcarengi testified on this matter. Again, we can't even, and I know we haven't gotten to asking it to be admitted to evidence, but we can't even authenticate it. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your objections noted. Overruled.
Okay, so understanding that statement that you haven't been through and reviewed the document, but did you testify at the hearing in this particular matter, docket number 14-132?
My recollection is that we filed multiple rounds of testimony and the company was able to negotiate a settlement, so I did not testify live.
There were no hearings on the
There wasn't a live
application. Could I ask you to please turn to page 26 of the direct testimony, which is marked as Exhibit 21? And I would like to direct your attention specifically to the question beginning on line 8. You see, and please take your time and let me know when you finish. You can.
You want me to read this?
Well, if you want to read it to yourself, I have some specific questions, and I will represent to you it's only about question that begins on line 8. It's not going to, moment go, it carries over to 9.
Okay.
So, Mr. Valcarengi, your testimony here states that that the labor-related expenses that were proposed on behalf of Artesian Water are reasonable because, in your opinion, quote, AWC needs to retain a trained and experienced workforce to perform critical functions across a complex integrated water system comprising multiple sources of supply with varying water characteristics and treatment technology requirements with water distributed through the 10 district service levels.
Sorry, Counsel, go ahead.
At the time that you put this testimony together, you supported that statement as being support for a labor-related adjustment, correct?
Objection again.
Your
Say,
objection's noted.
Thank
It's
you.
a standing objection. Overruled.
I'm sorry, can you give me the question again?
So you posed what I just read as support for a labor-related expense being reasonable that was being proposed with you as the sponsor by Artesian Water. Is that correct?
Well, yes. Every company needs to retain a qualified and talented workforce.
And you then go on to say that it is AWC's responsibility to ensure customers receive high-quality water and reliable service. In order to attract and retain qualified personnel capable of meeting this responsibility, AWC must be able to offer competitive wages and benefits. Is that a true and accurate statement?
That's what the testimony states, yes.
And this is your testimony.
It is.
Could you please turn to page 27?
I have it.
And at the very last sentence to this response, it says, you testify, when considering the significant cost pressures AWC continually faces with regard to employment compensation expenses, especially in the area of rising medical insurance costs, the level of pro forma payroll and benefit costs included in the test period ending September 30, 2014 are both fair and reasonable. Is that correct? Did I read that accurately?
That's what the testimony states, yes.
And is that true and accurate?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, because this, pardon me, Counsel, if Counsel is asking, is that true that he said that here, my client can read these words here, but as my client says, we haven't reviewed this, I haven't seen it, my co-counsel hasn't seen it, it hasn't been verified as actually what was filed into the case, that case.
Your objection's noted. Overruled if you can answer.
Can I have the question again?
I'll do my best because I don't have it written down. I'm directing you to the sentence that begins with when considering that I just read into the record.
I have that.
And I'm asking, is that a true and accurate statement?
I would say yes, but I don't have the underlying supporting information that I would have had with me when I filed the testimony, if that makes sense.
When you put together the testimony, though, you had that underlying information, correct?
Of course.
And you sponsored this testimony that was filed in this docket in Delaware, is that correct?
Yes.
And just so to clarify for the record, the use of test period in Delaware is a little bit different than it could be used here, where in that case there was a test year that was the historical data that was relied upon to put together the rate case. But then the test period is actually a period of time that post-dates the test year. Isn't that correct?
No. Typically what happens, you file a partially projected test year. I want to say, boy, you're really jogging my memory. I think it was a June test year, and part of that was projected, and then it becomes actual further down in the proceeding. I want to say September. Up
Okay,
to-
so
up to-
just to jog your recollection, on page 3 of the testimony that you have before you, you identify the test year as the period ending December 31, 2013, and then the test period consisting of 12-month period ending September 30th, 2014. So as I mentioned in the, when we discussed on page 29, where we, on 27, I'm sorry, where we were talking about the benefit costs included for the test period. These are benefit costs that are outside of the historical test year that was used as a basis for rates in that proceeding.
No, I would disagree with that. Because what we did in Delaware, according to Delaware law, you are allowed to use a test period consisting of 9 months of actual data and 3 months of projected data. That data becomes fully known during the course of the proceeding.
Could you please turn to page 25 of this testimony?
I'm sorry, counsel, could you repeat that page number for me,
Page
please?
25 of Exhibit 21, the
Thank you, sir.
direct testimony.
Thank you, sir.
I have it.
Okay, and I'm going to direct your attention to the your testimony that begins on line 3. It says the next adjustment of $739,183 reflects the increased cost of group insurance benefits based on current premium rates and personnel. AWC has received notice that its medical insurance premiums are expected to rise in the range of 8 to 15% over premiums currently in effect when coverage is renewed in August 2014. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And so in here, you are relying on industry expectations for the increase in insurance premiums?
No, it's not industry expectations. It is what our vendors were telling us their expectation of what the premiums were going to be and what the impact would be on our cost.
But these are premiums that had not yet gone into effect. Is that correct?
But it is based on the intelligence that we received from our vendors as to what our costs were going to do. It's not based on some global industry data. It's based on what our costs were expected to, what impact we were expected to see.
So would it be fair to maybe call them informed projections?
Sure. And you could also say that's why there's a range there of 8 to 15.
And could you please turn to page 33? And I'm referring to the insurance costs questions that begin on line 4 and go through line 10. Would it be fair to say that this is also an informed projection where the adjustment that is being recommended here annualizes the company's insurance cost for the test period based on a conservative projected 10% increase estimated by the company's insurance vendors? Is that the same type of informed projection that you were referring to earlier?
Yes.
Could you please turn to page 18?
Same document?
Same document, yes. I'll let you know when we switch.
You said 18?
Yes, 18.
I'm there.
Okay. And here you talk about projections that form the basis of adjustments in the operating costs. And some of those costs we were just talking about, with labor, insurance, et cetera. And you define known and measurable as items that can be reasonably expected to occur and are expected to have an ongoing effect on the company's operations. Is that correct?
Where do I define that?
Please look at lines 10 through 12.
Okay, I see that.
So here you say that the operating costs, the projections, are based upon either known or measurable changes, but then you identify another type of cost that would be reasonable, and that is items that can be reasonably expected to occur and are expected to have an ongoing effect on the company's operations. You see that?
I do.
And you believe that those are reasonable adjustments to historical test year data?
Based on how the Delaware Public Service Commission handled cases, yes.
Is it your testimony that Maryland does not allow for adjustments related to items that can be reasonably expected to occur and are expected to have an ongoing effect on the company's operations?
If there is appropriate data that amplifies and documents the cost, and the costs are as close to the test year as possible. This commission typically relies on a test year standard when developing revenue requirements.
I would like to actually now turn you to Exhibit 22, and I just have a few questions on that. Do you have that document?
I do.
Obviously, you have the right to go through and look through the entire document. I will represent this document was obtained from the Commission's, the Delaware Public Service Commission's website. I'm going to ask you very targeted, specific questions, so I'm not going to ask you generally about the entirety of the document. Could you please turn to page could you please turn to page 40 of this document, Exhibit 22?
You said 40, sir?
40, 40, yes.
I'm there.
Okay. And I'm referring to the question that begins on line 14, where here you are addressing arguments that were raised by the public advocate in Delaware to support the removal of merit pay increases that you recommended. And I'm going to read here. You say, Mr. Watkins, who I assume is the DPA witness, appears to assert that since merit increase expenses have not yet occurred, that it is unreasonable to include the expenses because he cannot state with certainty what expense burden will actually occur. Mr. Watkins' flawed logic fails to consider the fact that all companies, including AWC, experience wage pressure on an ongoing basis. Do you see that?
I do.
And when you prepared this testimony on behalf of Artesian Water, you believe that to be true and accurate?
Again, objection, Your Honor. I know it's ongoing, and I apologize for delaying, but counsel cannot ask a question, ask him if he believes it's true that he said this, when we haven't had a chance to authenticate it. Just because he says he got it from the website, we don't maintain that website. So, objection again.
Overruled. If the witness can answer the question, he can answer. It's cross-examination.
And you'd like me to repeat the question?
Thank you.
Okay. I'm asking that when you prepared this testimony, did you believe the testimony that you prepared here is true and accurate?
Well, obviously it was true and accurate.
Yes. Okay. Could we please, on page 41, I would like to direct your attention to the bottom of page 41. And here, one of the issues that you raise regarding Mr. Watkins', I guess, qualifications to opine on the removal of merit pay increases is that you make it a point to inform the commission that Mr. Watkins neither owns, manages, works, nor hires employees that are required to provide public water service. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And you think that that is a valid basis for questioning the recommendations of Mr. Watkins?
It's what the testimony says. I mean, at the time I wrote this, my understanding was that Mr. Watkins didn't have an understanding of what our operations did and what employee complement we needed in order to provide service to the customers.
Okay, thank you. Could we turn to page 42? And promise you I only have a couple more and then I will be finished. So I would like to direct your attention to the question that addresses the removal of bonus and incentive compensation from the level of labor expenses provided by the parties. Do you see that question? It begins on line 3.
I do.
And here you represent Artesian's view that a test for inclusion of such expenses, like the bonus and incentive compensation, should not be focused on the form of compensation, but rather should be based upon how total wages compare to the market. Is that your testimony here?
Yes, that's what the testimony states.
Okay, and you believe that to be true?
Well, true here in this case or true in...
When you made this statement, did you believe it to be true that the test for inclusion of incentive and bonus compensation should not be focused on the form of compensation, but rather should be based on how total wages compare to the market?
I believe it's an accurate statement, yes.
And could we please move down to the very next Q&A? And it's one that deals with the public advocate's recommendation to remove from the revenue requirement and cost of service expenses associated with stock options. You see that?
I do.
Counsel, I'm sorry, sir. What lines are you on?
We're on page 42, beginning on line 12.
Thank you.
And here, there was a recommendation by the public advocate witness, Watkins, to remove stock options. Is that correct?
I think that's accurate. Not having his testimony in front of me, I can only state based on what I read here. But generally, I would state that, yes.
Your summary
yes.
states this,
yes.
of what his testimony is. And your response is that Artesian disagrees and that stock options are simply another form of compensation available to employees. Compensation of this sort should be viewed in totality with the other forms of compensation provided and assessed against the compensation analysis. And in this case, just to make clear up purposes of this question, do you have recollection of the fact that a compensation analysis was done by an independent third party to assess Artesian's total compensation? If you remember, I don't mean for this to be a memory test.
Generally, we did market analyses on labor costs. So my answer would be yes.
So, Mr. Valcarengi, you can set the. I have no further questions regarding either SMECO 21 or 22. Your Honor, I would like to move these documents into evidence. I can represent that and obviously staff may go and look and check the website, check the official docket for the Delaware Public Service Commission to ensure completeness. To the extent that there is information that is not included, I would not object to have it, but we believe that this is the full set of both his direct and the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Valcarengi. We think it bears directly on issues that are going to be addressed in this particular case regarding, in his professional expert opinion, what the appropriate treatment is of certain types of costs. And I think it speaks directly to that point, and I think it would be fair to be able to address this in brief and on the record. And so we renew, SMECO renews its request to move 21 and 22 into the record.
Staff respectfully objects. We've never seen this. I've never seen this until today. I don't doubt Mr. Duver's truthfulness that he got it off the website, but maybe the website's wrong. Maybe there was changes. And I can't possibly redirect my client based on something I've just seen today. He's pointed to a couple lines here and there. I haven't read the whole document. So I don't see how it could be admitted into evidence, and we would strongly object. If they wanted to break for a day and I had a chance to study it, perhaps, and then redirect my client, I'm just offering perhaps. But based on what's here today, having never seen it, no email, nothing about it, it wasn't appended to anybody's testimony or offered into evidence through their own witnesses. I'd strongly object. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to be heard? Office of People's Counsel?
Your Honor, I will say that this is not a certified business record. If it was downloaded from the website, we should have some type of certification attesting that this is in fact full testimony from Mr. Valcarengi in that proceeding. I would also point out that only certain aspects of this testimony were confirmed live by Mr. Valcarengi. He has not stated that the entire contents are correct and accurate. So we would support staff in that objection. Thank you.
Department of the Navy have a position?
No, Your Honor, no objections.
I'm going to overrule sustain the objection of staff. The testimony that was elicited from counsel goes to the veracity and cross-examination of the witness, and everything that was elicited is in the record. As far as the admission of the documents at this point, I'm going to sustain. I'm not admitting the documents at this point because they have been used to cross-examine as far as the areas that you have, but as far as the substance and the witness hasn't identified, there's not enough relevance as far as I'm concerned at this point to admit them in their entirety. It's also unfair to staff counsel at this point to do redirect. Inclined to take a break and do an early lunch, and then staff can have an opportunity to review the documents and redirect, and then SMECO may have an opportunity again to offer those documents.
That's fair, Your Honor.
Do you have
I have additional
cross-examination, and then over lunch I will we'll have an extended lunch for staff to have an opportunity to review some of the information that was presented in Exhibit 21 and 22.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I thank you for your indulgence. I just want to also state for the record that I'm not familiar with Delaware law or how the Delaware Public Service Commission works. In an hour or 2 hours, I'm not going to get boned up enough on that either. But I thank you very much.
Your Honor, you made a very good point about the fact that everything that I asked about is in the record, it's in the transcript, and our intention would be to actually cite to the transcript and this discussion here in order to avoid any unnecessary delays. SMECO will withdraw the request to admit these into the record. Mr. Valcarengi, could I please direct your attention to your direct testimony? And specifically, I would like to direct your attention to page 4 and table 1. Just let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, great. Table 1 you provide as a SMECO's rate case history. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this dates back 17 years. Is that correct?
Yes, through 2007.
And can you confirm which of the cases that are on this list you have testified in? I've identified, I believe, 9456 from your CV, but I just want to confirm that that is accurate, that that's the only other case that's on this list. That
Based on looking at this chart, I think 9456 is the only case of these cases that I've testified in.
Okay. Did you review the record in each one of these cases?
I'm generally familiar with most of SMECO's filings.
Okay, so in case number 9106, what was the basis for requesting an adjustment to rates in that case?
I can't state that. I don't have that much of a memory that I can recall the intimate details of every SMECO case going back.
So with respect to 9106, you can't.
Mr. Valcarandri, just one moment, please. Could you please pull the microphone a little bit closer?
Sorry.
It's okay.
So with respect to case number 9106, you can't speak with, like, regarding what the underlying basis was for the $16.45 million that was requested.
No,
Okay.
I can't give you intimate details of any of the cases. Just as if you pulled up my CV and pulled any of those cases, I wouldn't be able to give you a summary of what happened in each of those cases.
But
if
you offer this table up to show a comparison of the amounts requested in 5 prior cases compared against 9738, the instant case right now. Is that correct?
Well, the table was offered as a means of showing how the current revenue requirement in this proceeding compares to what similar revenue requirements were in past SMECO rate cases.
But you have not done an analysis to say whether there are similarities in what was driving the need for the rate case in any of these other cases that you hear. It's more of an optics thing.
Well, that's not what the table was intended for. The table was simply intended to show how the revenue requirement compares to what was asked for previously.
Would you agree that in case number 9688, which was SMECO's last rate case, that the purpose of that case was to begin depreciating the costs associated with SMECO's AMI meter program that were sitting in a commission-approved regulatory asset?
Well, I would say it was not the depreciation of it, but the activation of the AMI system.
But there was approval was sought to actually move those costs into rates.
As I said.
And 9456, that's the one that you were involved in there. It shows a revenue decrease, but that revenue decrease was being driven by the fact that SMECO ended up decoupling the transmission component of its service from distribution. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And we've established that you don't have any insight that you could share with us today regarding 9106, 9234, and 9396 in terms of what the drivers were for those cases.
I apologize, Your Honor. Counsel, could you just list those cases one more time, sir?
Sure. It's on table 1. It's 9106, 9234, and 9396.
Thank you, sir.
And just to confirm, what we've said is that we've talked about 9688 and 9456, and as you sit here today, you can't speak to details regarding what was the driver for those 3 cases I just identified.
I haven't done I haven't done a walkthrough of SMECO's cases. I mean, I can tell you that '93, '96, which is on the chart, has a test year of 12 months ended September 2015. 9456 has a test year 12 months ended 2016. 9688 has a test year 12 months ended 2021. I don't have knowledge of the other two cases, 9106 and 9234.
Are you aware, and would you agree, that in 2015, SMECO suffered a loss?
A loss overall or a loss with respect to distribution operations? Because those are two different things.
Operational loss.
2015?
Yes. Do you, maybe this will help.
I thought my understanding was that it was the opposite, that the non-operating margins produced a loss and not distribution operations. So I don't have financial statements in front of me, so I'm kind of going from memory here.
Do you recall asking a question in discovery whether SMECO has ever suffered an operational loss?
Yes, I did ask that question.
And do you recall SMECO's response?
I believe they came back and said 2015, but I thought there was, as I indicated, I thought it was an overall loss, but not at the distribution level.
Okay, so Ms. Valcarengi, and correct me if I'm characterizing your testimony incorrectly, but you don't dispute that currently we are in an inflationary environment. Is that correct?
I guess you'd have to define what an inflationary environment is, because you're constantly in an inflationary environment by the simple notion that you operate in the marketplace.
Okay. And inflation, simply, like the term itself, defines the fact that inflation means that there's an upward pressure on cost. Is that correct?
Well,
you wouldn't have costs going down in an inflationary environment.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I just read an article yesterday that suggested that inflation is coming down. It's roughly 2.9%.
But that wasn't my question. My question was, if you are in a period of inflation, regardless of what the rate of inflation is, by definition, it means that there is an upward pressure on costs. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
So you're saying that costs go down in periods
costs could be under contract to have a specific designated amount.
So you were in the room when Ms. Kennedy testified?
Yes, last Monday.
Yes, okay. And were you involved in the preparation of data requests that were served on SMECO?
Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to object, Your Honor. I mean, which data request is it? The number of them.
Sustained, if you could be more specific, which data requests?
Well, I issued a number of data requests.
That's the point of my question is, and it was a significant number of data requests you have made over the course of this proceeding. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if I would call it significant. It was in the neighborhood 10, 11 for me, I think.
And they weren't 10 or 11 individual questions, but 10 or 11 questions.
10 or 11 documents that had multiple questions in each.
Okay. And SMECO responded to each and every one of the data requests that you created?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
Okay, at this time, Your Honor, what I would like to do is to simply give everybody notice of the certain data requests that we wish to explore with Mr. Valcarengi. SMECO had admitted into the record SMECO Exhibit 8 through 13, and I can, if Your Honor would prefer, I can go through and describe each and every one of these right now. We have courtesy copies for Mr. Valcarengi so that he can refer to them as we're going through them. Or I can just refer to them and discuss them as we go through them.
I prefer that you for the record's sake, go through each one and describe what you're presenting to him.
Okay.
In that way.
Great.
It's clearer.
So the first exhibit that we intend to explore with Mr. Valcarengi is SMECO Exhibit number 8. It is SMECO's response to staff data request number 5, item 5-15. And it is a request that sought the audit report and associated work papers of Adams, Jenkins, and Cheatham regarding the audit the firm conducted with respect to the audit for the year ended December 31st, 2023. And then the next exhibit is SMECO Exhibit 9 that was admitted into the record last Monday. And it is...
I'm sorry, Your Honor, if there's any way counsel could ask this question, say, we're talking about SMECO 8, 5-15, and ask us questions, or I don't know what
I thought I was following Your Honor's suggestion to go through and identify each one of the ones and then get into the questioning.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, as you're asking the question.
Okay.
Yes, specifically what you're directing that each exhibit to, and then go through that way.
So what we'll do is, we'll do it this way. We're going to hand Mr. Valcarengi a stack, and then he can just refer to them as we're going through them.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Please.
I'd like to ask to see them first. Thank you.
Oh, this is what I just...
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, fine.
They've been admitted to the record, and
that's fine. Thank you.
I believe you said you had a copy. Right
I do. Thank you so much.
While you're looking through those, Mr. Valcarengi, I'll just represent for the record that these are exhibits that have already been admitted into the record as SMECOs 8 through 13, and what I intend to do is just to walk through a number of these with you. So please obviously take your time. I'm not certain whether you've had an opportunity before today to take a look based on you listening to Ms. Kennedy's testimony.
fine. Let's go.
Okay, great. Now, it's a fair characterization of your testimony that you believe that SMECO has not adequately provided sufficient information that would allow you to determine what transpired between 2022 and 2023. Is that correct?
Can you give me that question again, please?
Is it a fair characterization of your testimony that you believe that SMECO has not provided sufficient data to allow you to determine what happened between 2022 and 2023? Is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement. We've seen, through the discovery, we've seen a number of documents which portray costs going from X to Y, but there's no narrative, there's no statement that says this is what drove cost. This is an issue that I've been announcing since the beginning of the case of what provoked the loss that the company experienced in 2023. As I sit here today, I still can't put my finger on what caused SMECO to experience a loss in 2023.
And you actually go so far as to accuse SMECO of not being forthcoming and withholding information regarding what happened in 2023. Isn't that true?
I don't know if I said withholding.
Could you please turn to page 9 of your direct testimony?
9. I do say forthcoming.
Here you're asked the question, in your opinion, has SMECO been forthcoming? And you said you do not believe that the organization has been forthcoming. So I'll ask the question again, and that your position here is that you're accusing SMECO and Ms. Kennedy of withholding information that would shed light on what happened in 2023.
Objection, Your Honor. Respectfully, Mr. Duver, characterizing Mr. Valcarengi's testimony as accusations, I think is a little bit inflammatory and
Sustained.
Thank you.
You do say that you believe that SMECO has not been transparent. Is that correct? And I can refer you to page 11 of your testimony on lines 16 through 18.
Same testimony?
Same testimony.
I think it's an accurate read that the record does not contain sufficient information from SMECO to ascertain what happened, what produced the loss that they experienced in 2023. SMECO has since provided a litany of information to say this cost went from here to here, here to here, but we don't know what provoked the extreme variance in cost between 2022 and 2023. For the record, we know that SMECO enjoyed a profit of $12 million in 2022. And I've been asking and asking and asking what occurred between 2022 and 2023 that caused the cooperative to sustain an operating a loss from their distribution operations.
And just to clarify for the record, you didn't mean to say that SMECO had a profit. SMECO doesn't have profits.
That's an inaccurate word, a positive operating margin.
Thank you. So, Mr. Valcarengi, could you please take a look at what is SMECO in evidence, SMECO exhibit number 8, and it's the SMECO response to staff data request number 5, item number 5-15.
I have it.
Okay. And this is a document that provides the audited financial statement and the independent auditor's report that shows a comparison of the costs that were incurred in 2022 against the costs that were incurred in 2023. Is that correct?
Well, it recaps the financial activity in 2022 and 2023.
And these are financial figures that are attached to the independent auditor's report. These are audited financials. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are you aware of whether the auditors found anything unusual and noted anything unusual in SMECO's, regarding SMECO's finances?
Well, I would have no way of knowing that. It's not noted in this report, but I don't know what conversations went on between Adams, Jenkins, and the cooperative.
So can you please take a look at what is the, we have the document that's marked SMECO's Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc. and SMECO Solar LLC financial statements December 31, 2023 and 2022. That cover page is followed by a table of contents, and then in turn there is an independent auditor's report that follows the table of contents. Do you see that?
Yep, I do.
And do you see that in the second paragraph of that report, it states that in our opinion, the consolidated financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the financial position of Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative and SMECO Solar LLC as of December 31st, 2023 and 2022.
I do, but that doesn't answer the question. They simply went through and reviewed the financial activity. It doesn't give you the $64,000 question of what happened between 22 and 23. Because I never say that the costs in question are unreasonable, unwarranted, what other adjective you'd like to say. I never said that in the testimony. I simply said that in terms of making a revenue requirement, what transpired in 23 is abnormal.
So could we please turn to page 4 of the, it's not page 4 of the exhibit, but page 4 of the financial statements.
Page 4 of the financial statements. So I have a 4 down below, sir?
4 down below, correct. Are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. So just so that we understand what this document shows, and so I understand your testimony. So we have and I'm going to use as an example, we can walk through the operating expenses. So what we show is a column, the right-hand column on 2022 shows the level of the expense for 2022, and then in 2023, we have the level of expense. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so as an example, I'll just pick one out, depreciation and amortization. We see that in 2022, the total expense was $44,922,008. And then in 2023, that figure increased to $48,087,833.
Yes, I see that.
Correct. And similarly, like when you look at the A&G costs, they went from $41,353,004. Those costs increased to $45,908,353.
I see that as well.
And we could go, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can see the movement. And you acknowledged, based on just the discussion we were having, that this movement is, you're not questioning the movement of the cost as far as what was incurred. And you're not questioning the reasonableness of the costs that are in the 2023 column. You're just saying that there hasn't been sufficient information provided that would explain why those differences that I gave you as examples occurred. Like, why did depreciation go up?
No, I didn't say that in my testimony. What I said was, it's a two-factor argument. Number one is you go from 22 to 23, and there's an operating loss. Nowhere in my testimony do I communicate that the activity or those numbers are inaccurate, unwarranted, or whatever. For rate-making purposes, if I build rates based on depressed margins, then the revenue requirement reflects that activity in perpetuity.
Okay, so I understand that. And so, like I said, we're not going to go through each and every one of these, but so you're not, in your testimony, you're saying, identifying any of these costs as being unreasonable or unwarranted. It's just the explanation for it.
Well, the record doesn't reflect what happened to cause an operating loss in 23. I can add and subtract a list of numbers. In fact, I did that in my original testimony to say, here's the elements that produce the change between 22 and 23. What I'm saying is, we don't know the factors that drove the company to experience a loss. And that's a different story than when you're developing rates and you have a test year, you want to design the rates sufficiently so that in perpetuity they don't reflect an abnormal result. We can state that 23 produced an abnormal result simply because there was an operating loss during that period.
Let's talk a little bit. I mentioned depreciation. Could we talk a little bit about that? What causes depreciation expense to increase?
Certainly, depreciation expense will either rise or fall based on the level of assets that are being used in operations.
So to the extent that the company is making capital investments in its system and placing plant into service, that would cause depreciation expense to increase.
Certainly.
Are you familiar with how SMECO raises money in order to be able to fund its operations?
How they fund their operations. And I know they use they fund it based on debt. Short-term debt and long-term debt. Now, what factors they use to generate short-term or line of credit, I can't speak to, factors that drive long-term debt, short-term debt, and so forth.
But to the extent that SMECO relies on either long-term or short-term debt, there is a cost associated with taking on that debt. Is that correct?
Sure.
And that cost is, in the context of long-term debt, that cost would be whatever the terms of the loan agreement are, whatever the percentage interest rate is, and actually the term of the debt. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And you would agree that short-term debt is similar. Is that correct? In that you have a principal balance and you have interest on that
Yes.
principal balance. And are you aware that SMECO has effectively short-term lines of credit that it can draw on in order, on a short-term basis, in order to help fund its operation?
Well, I know that there are lines of credit. I can't speak to balances and what levels and so forth, but I know that there is a line of credit that SMECO uses to fund operations.
Okay. So going back to the discussion that we were having about depreciation, and you mentioned in your testimony, and I think it's uncontroverted, the fact that SMECO ended up in the last rate case moving a significant, its capital investments in its AMI infrastructure and program were moved effectively into rates. And that you're aware of that. You've mentioned that in your testimony. I think.
I just need a verbal
Yeah.
response.
Oh, yes, I am aware of that. Sorry.
And that moving those dollars into rates causes an upward pressure on depreciation. Is that correct? Depreciation expense will go up.
Yes.
Okay. Would you also agree that to the extent that SMECO relied on whether it's long-term or short-term debt to help fund those capital investments, that will have also an increased pressure or upward pressure on the costs associated with the short-term interest expense?
I would agree that to the extent you use debt, it is going to have a corresponding interest expense associated with it.
Yeah. And so can we agree that as you increase utilization of that short-term debt, you're going to increase your costs?
All things being equal, yes.
Mr. Falcarengi, I would like to now direct your attention, hopefully we can get through these exhibits pretty quick, but direct your attention to SMECO Exhibit 9, which is the SMECO response to staff data request number 5, item number 5-12. This is a data request that asks to provide monthly financial statements for calendar year 2022, 2023, and as many months of 2024 that are available. If the statements reflect operations other than those related solely to SMECO's distribution operations, please indicate and provide portions that relate to distribution. Do you see this?
I do.
Okay. Is this one of the data requests that you prepared?
I didn't prepare this. I prepared the question.
Well, I didn't say the response. I said, is this one of the data requests that you prepared?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And SMECO provided here, consistent with the requests, SMECO provided 28 separate attachments giving the financial statements for each month for the year 2022, 2023, and 2024. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, the statements for December 2023, I believe I attached to my direct testimony.
And you've taken a look and reviewed all of these attachments?
All of which attachments?
The attachments that are referenced in this data request that you, in response to this data request you drafted.
I reviewed 22 and 23, and I don't know that I reviewed at a high level those in 24.
Could you please turn to or reference SMECO Exhibit 11? This will identify for the record is staff data request number 1, item number 1-1. It is SMECO's response to data request number 1 to all parties. And in summary, correct me if I summarize this incorrectly, but it is for all parties who provided testimony in this case to provide their work papers with all, cells intact. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, is that the question?
Yeah. I said, is it correct that this request is asking all parties to 9738 to provide their work papers that support their testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to move to the second paragraph after that first bullet, where it says, for SMECO witness Kennedy, and in addition to work papers and information already produced during the course of discovery and otherwise in connection with this proceeding, please see the following attachments. And she lists a number of attachments. There are 8 additional worksheets. Is that correct?
Yes.
And examples, and obviously it speaks for itself here, but there was a 2022 versus 2023 operating expenses work paper. We have payroll comparison. Is that correct?
That's what this says, yes.
And then we have a payroll comparison over the course of a 2-year period, 3-year period.
Yes.
Okay. Could you please turn to what has been marked as SMECO Exhibit 11. I mean, sorry, we just did 11. SMECO Exhibit 12. This is a request that was propounded by OPC on SMECO. It's OPC data request number 1, item number 1-21, and it seeks the general ledger for the cooperative for the years 2021, 2022, and 2023. Do you see this?
I do.
And did you, prior to preparation of your testimony in this case, did you review the response to this request?
No, I have not seen
So
this document before.
You did not consider this in the preparation of your testimony?
I have not seen this before, no.
We go to SMECO Exhibit number 13. Now, I'm going to have some questions that when we walk through SMECO 13, but I'm going to represent for the record that this is a series of data request responses to requests that were propounded by staff. They were admitted into the record combined as a packet as SMECO Exhibit number 13. And for the record, the responses that are included in this packet are staff DR 2, items number 2-6 and 2-10, staff DR 5, items number 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, 5-5, 5-6, 5-8, corrected, 5-9, 5-10, 5-16, and 5-17, as well as 5-48. It also, this packet includes the response to staff data request 16, items number 16-7 and 16-9. It includes staff data request 18, items number 18-1 and to 18-3. Items staff DR 19, items number 19-2, staff DR 25, item number 25-11, staff DR 29, item number 29-2, 29-4, and then sorry, one moment. And then also staff SMECO's response to staff data request number 31, item number 31-1, and finally the response to SMECO data request, SMECO response to staff data request number 31, item number 31-2. Have you, like, following Ms. Kennedy's testimony on day one of the hearing, did you have an opportunity to review the data requests that were submitted into the record?
Which data request?
The ones that I just went through and read that are included in this packet as SMECO exhibit number 13.
I have seen these before, yes.
Okay. And are these, obviously, if we address a certain one and you weren't the one who drafted it, is your understanding that the data requests that are included here are data requests that you have drafted and information that you had requested?
Are you asking me if I asked all the data requests that are in this packet?
Correct. And I realize that, you know, if you can't say so because you'd have to flip through each and every one, just let me know, because I don't mean to try everyone's patience, but.
It sure looks like they are, but.
Well, if we get to one that I ask you about and it's not one that you're familiar with because you either haven't seen it or you weren't the drafter of it, just please let me know.
Okay.
Could you please turn to this, and I really apologize, I maybe should have put total page numbers on this, but I'd like you to first take a look at the easy one, page 1 of this exhibit, and it's the response to item number 2-6. Do you see this?
Yes.
And this is obviously one of your earlier data requests that you had provided to the company. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you see that in the first paragraph, SMECO is giving a narrative description of its increase in its operational expense. It's both quantifying it as well as giving the drivers of these costs, for example, like cost, availability of materials, substation transformers, pad mount transformers. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And you do see that, in addition, in this narrative response regarding the components of SMECO's distribution business that are driving the need for a change in rates, SMECO provides a description of its working with contractors to support work related to its distribution operations. And SMECO then gets more granular and actually provides type of contractor and the increase that was experienced to the increases that were experienced based on these contractor costs. You see that?
Yes.
And here, SMECO provides the narrative discussion of costs that have increased post-pandemic, and that these costs and increased use of contractors was something that is impacted by regulatory requirements that are imposed on SMECO for reliability metrics, vegetation management. You see that?
I don't see the part about you said about
It's the second sentence in that second paragraph above the table. These contractors often support SMECO's ability to meet its reliability requirements.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was on the next
okay.
page.
And then if we could please turn the page to page 2 of this request. SMECO here provides a narrative discussion of the increased pressure that SMECO is facing regarding payroll costs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the following paragraph is SMECO providing a narrative discussion of how interest rate have impacted SMECO's increase in costs.
Is that a question?
Do you see that? Like,
do
you
yes.
agree that SMECO provided that information here?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what it says in the paragraph.
And then you asked, and if you could please turn the page to item number 2-10, like you were asking for the principal causes leading to the distribution loss here, and SMECO SMECO refers back to the data request that we just reviewed, where SMECO provides the increased costs that it has incurred in in these narrative paragraphs on in 2-6. Is that correct?
That's
SMECO
what it
relies on
says.
that. Yeah. Okay, I want to revisit the questions that we had been talking about how SMECO funds its operations, and you had mentioned that your understanding is that it does it through debt, whether it's short-term debt or long-term debt. Is that
Yes.
correct? When you were preparing your testimony, did you also, in your preparing your testimony, take a look at the other witnesses' testimony? And specifically, I'm referring to the DSC testimony that was provided by all the various witnesses.
I've read or reviewed every piece of testimony in this proceeding.
And you are familiar with the testimony that was put in by both SMECO witness Cox as well as SMECO witness Kennedy regarding what SMECO's DSC levels were in 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in Ms. Kennedy's Exhibit BK-1.
And when SMECO is funding its operations, and would you agree, and did you hear the testimony that SMECO's experienced DSC in 2023 dropped to 1.31? Do you recall that testimony?
I don't recall that, but I can tell you a number in that range appears on Ms. Kennedy's schedule.
Okay. And you're also generally familiar with the indenture that SMECO has?
No, I can't tell you. I mean, there's a mortgage indenture over the debt, but I can't tell you that I'm familiar with what the indenture says.
Well, are you familiar with the testimony that places a 1.25 DSC level
Yes,
in the indenture?
I've heard that. I can't say that I've read that number in the indenture.
Okay. Now, so let's get back to our discussion of the long-term debt and short-term debt. Do you know what the impact would be if SMECO were to refinance its long-term debt in 2023 with its DSC being at a level of 1.31?
Objection, Your Honor. This is speculative, but more than that, Mr. Valcarengi is not the DSC witness in this case.
Your Honor, I'm not asking about the DSC recommendation that staff is propounding. It's really to get into discussion about costs, interest costs.
Right. Yes, sir. But Mr. Valcarengi's, this is outside the scope of Mr. Valcarengi's testimony.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Fortunately, I don't write them down. So what would be the impact or the implication of refinancing the long-term debt that is used to fund SMECO's operation if SMECO had refinanced that debt in 2023? What impact would that have on that 1.31 DSC?
Objection. This is outside the scope of Mr. Valcarengi's testimony, and it would be speculative at best.
Okay, I'm going to overrule staff's objection if the witness can answer. The witness is free to answer.
You're asking if I know what would...
Well, let me ask it a different way. Maybe this will help. Would you agree with the statement that if SMECO is at a 1.31 DSC and it sought to refinance its long-term debt, that the resulting DSC would be lower after the refinancing, would be lower than 1.31? Is that something that you're able to respond to?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I know Mr. Valcarengi is sorry. He's trying to lead the witness, and I object again.
It's cross-examination, and your objection's noted.
Okay, thank you.
under a refinance, it would be based on what rates, what terms came out. and if the overall was greater than the interest rate, then it would have an upward pressure on SMECO's cost.
And what pressure would it have on the DSC?
Well, to the extent your debt goes up, then that drives the calculation.
And it would cause a reduction in the achieved or actual DSC?
Objection. Again, this is outside the scope of Mr. Valcarenti's testimony.
Objections noted, overruled. If the witness can answer, he can
Well,
answer.
based on the DSC calculus, it's long-term debt plus depreciation plus the operating margins within a specific period. If the debt went up, then that would drive that calculation.
Well, perhaps are you aware of SMECO's position that has been made in testimony and in discovery that SMECO did not have an option during 2023 to refinance its long-term debt because of what the resulting DSC calculus would be?
I think I recall Miss Kennedy saying something to that effect when she was on the stand.
And you don't have any reason to dispute?
I have no reason to dispute what she said. I have no independent numbers of my own to call that into question.
Okay. And if SMECO, based on our prior discussion, if SMECO doesn't have the ability to access long-term debt, then the only other place that it has the ability to raise capital is short-term. Is that correct?
Well, it either uses short-term debt or it implements strategies to curtail cost, revise cost that it is currently experiencing.
But SMECO,
Cost minimization.
but cost mitigation strategies don't occur immediately in real time, do they?
They arguably they don't. They typically manifest over a period of months.
Could you please turn to the next data request in exhibit number 13, and it's staff data request number 5, item number 5-3, and this is SMECO's response.
I'm sorry, 5-3?
Item number 5-3. It's the very next. It's not the very next. I'm sorry, because
After 5-1?
after 5-2, you have 5-1. You have a spreadsheet. You have 5-2, and now I'm moving to 5-3.
I'm there.
Okay, and here it's what is being asked is the balance of short-term debt at the end of 2022, 2023, and the most recent balances in 2024. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And here, the SMECO provides that what is actually requested. It shows that the balance on short-term debt was $48 million outstanding at the end of 2022. And at the end of 2023, that figure rose over $14 million to 62.5. And then at the end of April 2024, that figure rose yet again, this time over $17 million. Do you see that?
I do.
And you're not contesting these figures. Is that correct?
I would have no reason to contest them.
Okay. And you would agree that as these balances, and I think we talked about sort of the utilization of short-term debt near the beginning of the cross, that as utilization increases on short-term debt, the company's costs are necessarily going to go up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, would you agree with the statement that short-term debt expense is impacted more by variability in the interest rates?
short-term, say that again, short-term
Is
interest.
short, would you agree with the statement that short-term debt is impacted more by variability of interest rates in comparison against long-term debt?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And so as interest rates fluctuate, as they increase, obviously that's going to have, if to the extent they increase, you're going to have increased costs. To the extent they decrease, you'll have decreased costs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And SMECO provided to staff in response to a data request 3 years worth of daily interest rates on its short-term line of credit. Is that correct?
Help me to where, or can you point me to where that was?
Could you please turn to SMECO exhibit number 10? And this is response to staff data request number 48, item number 48-1 through 48-20.
For the record, this is the response that came in on the night of July the 26th. I received this on Saturday the 27th. While I was
and we will have a discussion about that shortly. I just want to make sure that you see that included in the response to this data request is information that provides the daily interest rates on SMECO's, and I'm referring to 48-1, it provides the daily interest rates on SMECO's short-term debt for 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. So
I can see
you have over 1,400 days of interest rates.
in 48-1, there is a litany of information showing the rates in 21, 22, 23, and 24 for the line of credit from Kodak.
Okay, thank you. Could you please, in Exhibit 13, turn to item number 5-6?
Your Honor, excuse me. I apologize, counsel. Can I check in about if the witness needs a break, or is this almost done, or take as long as you like, but just to see if he needs a break after he's been on the stand for a while?
I intended to break for lunch at some point, but I would like to go to at least 12:30. Are you okay to go to 12:30 before we take a break?
So looking at item number 5-6, this is one of the requests that you had put together?
Yes.
Okay. And here, what SMECO has provided to you are their 2023 annual financial report that was submitted to the commission. Is that correct?
No, say the last part again.
I'm just almost reading from the question. This is a request where SMECO had provided you with the 2023 annual financial report that was filed with the commission.
Well, what's attached is not what was filed with the commission. This is your annual report that goes to your members. There's a different annual report that comes to the commission. Because when you filed the case, your annual report had not been filed with this commission.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to review the attached document?
Are you talking about the SMECO annual report?
This one, yes, this annual report
Yes,
that you have before you.
I've looked through this.
Okay. Well, let me ask that question. Have you had an opportunity to review the entirety of SMECO's response to staff request 40? Actually, stepping back, I want to refer you to staff 48 again.
That's
Exhibit
number
10.
10.
Exhibit 10, yes. Apologize. Exhibit 10.
Have
you had an opportunity to review the entirety of this response to staff data request 48?
Not in any specific detail.
These are questions that you propounded to SMECO, correct?
Yes, which I just indicated came back to me on July the 27th while I was in the midst of preparing my rebuttal testimony.
And today it's August 15th. And so between that date when you received the response and August 15th, you have not taken the opportunity to review the responses to staff number DR 48?
I mean, I've reviewed some of it to say that I know all of the contents of this document. I don't know that I would say that I have a full understanding of all of this information at this point.
And you didn't see the relevance of reviewing all of this material that you had asked for, and we can go through some of these questions that quantify and state how the components cited at page 10, lines 17 to 21 changed between 2022 and 2023, which led SMECO to lose $8.5 million from distribution operations. You didn't feel it was necessary once you received this response to review this in detail?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Yeah, thank you.
Could you please turn to item 48-7 in this set?
I apologize, counsel. I just needed a second to get there.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I'm sorry that these
And
don't
that's
have.
Exhibit 10 still?
Yes, it is. We're still in Exhibit 10.
Yes,
Oh.
I have 48-7.
I'm not there. I'm not there yet, counsel, though. Thank you.
Actually, just if you could please stop at 48-4. We're going to go in sequential order here.
I'm getting there. Thank you. 48-4, sir. 48-4?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So, Mr. Valcarengi, you see here that this request relates specifically to SMECO's contractor and consulting costs that have increased 27% since 2020. And it says, please identify the specific services and costs that changed between 2022 and 2023. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And SMECO provided the requested information. Is that correct?
Well, again, here, there's a document and there's a litany of percentages. It doesn't tell you or quantify the A to B, what costs were in 22 as opposed to what costs were in 23.
The request asks for, please identify the specific services and costs that changed. And the table below shows the specific services, and then the increase, the percentage increase in the cost.
Objection. There's no question there.
It says, please.
Isn't that true?
Sustained.
Is that true?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
The
the question?
Objection. He's asked and answered this. He's asked the same question, and the witness has answered.
Overruled.
The-
Initial question, there was not a question, it was a statement. So if
Right,
you could just
so-
rephrase.
Sure. Thank you, Your Honor. The request asks to identify specific services and costs that change between 2022 and 2023. And isn't it true that the table below lists specific services and the percentage change in the cost that was experienced between 2022 and 2023?
I would state that it provides a litany of percentage increases in component costs, but you cannot, from this chart, tell what the change or quantify. It doesn't quantify the impact on SMECO's cost.
Could you please turn to 48-6, please?
I'm there.
Okay. And this is a request that you propounded to SMECO, asking Ms. Kennedy to describe changes in labor compensation that have occurred over the period you referred to her testimony there, and then ask her to provide the specific cost impacts of labor and labor-related compensation between 2022 and 2023. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you, in 48-7, the very next request is where you ask for the same type of information. You're looking for information between 2022 and 2023, the specific changes in interest expense. Is that correct?
That's what the question says.
And SMECO responded to the question. Is that correct?
Well, 48-1 provides a litany of interest rates.
That's the one we had just discussed,
But
where
nowhere
there's
does
4 years worth of daily interest rates that are
Right.
provided to you,
Nowhere
correct?
does it quantify.
You recall that we did talk about, and we did refer just a little while ago to a data request response where SMECO identified its balance on its short-term
I do.
debt.
It went, I forget what
It was-
67 million.
It went from 40s to the 60s to the 70s over the course of 2022, 2023,
Yes.
2024. Okay. Mr. Valcrengi, were you provided copies of the most recent set of invoices related to the various contractors that are assisting SMECO in this rate case? And I'll just represent to you that an updated invoices through the end of July of 2024 were provided to the parties.
Yes, in fact, I think I included them in my surrebuttal testimony.
They actually post-dated your surrebuttal test, I believe, didn't they?
you post-dated my surrebuttal?
Let me see.
Oh,
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah,
Is there a
it's
question there?
question.
Ask my witness to hold.
Mr. Valcarengi, you said that you included the impact of the updated rate case expense invoices in your surrebuttal testimony?
I did. It was roughly, if I recall, 417,000. That was a number that SMECO had included, and I had seen invoices.
You filed your surrebuttal testimony on July 31st, 2024. The invoices were provided after July 31st, 2024.
Objection. Is there a question, counsel?
Are you aware of the fact that SMECO provided invoices for all of its contractors that are assisting in its rate case through the end of July, meaning through July 31st, 2024, that were provided to staff after your surrebuttal testimony was filed?
There were I have a document from SMECO dated August 2nd.
And could you?
And it entails a number of invoices related to rate case expenses. These obviously were not reflected in my testimony because it came in after I filed my testimony.
We finally got there, but yes. So have you reviewed these invoices prior to coming in today to testify?
Well, I mean, reviewed them in terms of what?
Have you looked at them and
Well,
looked at the totals, looked at the descriptions included as the work performed?
I have no reason to challenge the information that's presented in this document. But I would tell you that I haven't tallied this.
So my question is, have you, I'm assuming I know the answer, but prior to coming in today, you have not in any way reflected the impact of these updated actual costs that have been provided through the end of July of 2024. Is that correct?
Are you talking about this document dated August 2nd?
Correct. The one that obviously came in after your surrebuttal testimony. What I'm asking is...
And neither has SMECO, to my knowledge.
Like my question is, have you done anything between the time of your filing to see if it has any impact on your calculation of what the appropriate total is that should be included in SMECO's revenue requirement based on these actual data? If you haven't, you haven't.
I haven't.
Okay. Your Honor, I know you said 12:30. It's 12:25, and I think if I get into what I want to get into next, it's sort of going to be like right in the middle of something, and so I think this may be a natural place, a breaking point.
Yes, I agree. So we are going to break for an hour. We'll resume back at 1:30. Thank you. We can go off the record.